Listen to the presence of God within you. That's yearning to become full expression through you in your own unique way. That's what we're listening for. To tell you the truth, there can be some confusion about what we hear sometimes. When we ask God for guidance, we might expect some big booming voice to come down from the sky and say something like, "George, do it this way." But for most of us, that is not our experience. It kind of reminds me, thinking about that big booming voice, reminds me of the guy who was having just a heck of a time. He was having trouble at work. His relationship wasn't working so good. His adult kids had moved back home with him and eating all the food again. He was just having one challenge after another. And in desperation one day, he looked to the skies and he said, "God, why me? Why me, God?" And at that point, a silence fell across the room. Well, actually, fell across the land. He was outside. Don't want to mess this up. So a silence fell across the land. Wind started to stir. He looked up and the clouds parted. And he had just asked, "Why me, God?" And as the clouds parted, a big light shone through the clouds. And he heard this big booming voice that said, "Well, frankly, there's something about you that I've just never liked." But I digress. As we look for guidance and we turn within for prayer, we might hear God's booming voice maybe, but most likely that guidance is going to be very small and very subtle. Most of the guidance we receive isn't about a voice at all. Maybe it's just a gut feeling, just a notion that comes to mind, maybe after our prayer time. Perhaps it's an internal nudging. Maybe I should start moving toward what I really want to do. Might be what comes up for us. Maybe I should clean up some troubled relationships that I've had for a long time and really address that so that I can be at peace with those that I love and care about. Maybe I should take a class on a vocation that's something I've always thought about doing, but I've never done anything. Maybe now is the time. Now is the time that I should do that. Mary Alice and Richard Jaffola, in their book, Bequest, said, "We are always, always at possibility junction." The point we're at right now, no matter how wonderful it may be, or how terrible it may be, right now, we are at possibility junction. I've had those times in my life where it didn't feel that way. It didn't feel that way at all. It felt more like I was on a one-way street to hell with no intersections. I've had those kinds of experiences, and I know that many of you have too. Now, in those hell-on-earth experiences, those challenging times in our lives where we might want to, who knows what we might want to do. But one of the things that I'm going to encourage you to do is to reach out. Reach out. Maybe talk to a mental health professional. And if that's not a fit, then maybe talk to a friend or a counselor or a minister or a priest. Talk to someone who will support you on your journey. Someone who can help remind you that this journey, that on this journey, that this too will pass. And what's so hard to see sometimes, even in the middle of our turmoil, unfolding even when we can't see. And so we ask for guidance and then we move on. You might say, George, can't be that easy. I didn't say it was easy. I said we ask for guidance and then we move on. There is a power and a presence in you and in me that will see us through. I believe it. And the thought that rises up for me is, with God, all things really are possible. With God, all things are possible. Would you affirm that with me? With God, all things are possible. Amen. Amen. You got an amen? Good. You know, I didn't always know that for myself. And when times get tough, even now, sometimes I need to be reminded of that truth. One of my early teachers said to me, and to a group of people about this size, his name was Robert Anthony, and he said, if you thought that you were going to live a life without challenge, I've got some bad news for you. You were born on the wrong planet. You see, on this planet, we have challenges. It's just the way it is. So, all of us have challenges from time to time, and I'm going to tell you a little bit, just a little bit, about my journey. Many of you know me as Reverend George, or just George. Some know me as Papa. And true, that's the title. You know, we're celebrating the Reverend title today. Well, how did this happen? Was I always on a ministerial journey? Not really. Far from it. I grew up on the west side of Covington. I lived on Bakewell Street. That's not too far from here. It's about 5 or 10 minutes. And when I looked out my window, my bedroom window, right across the street, it wasn't a very wide street, right across the street was St. Aloysius. Right out my window. And all of my friends, 100% of my friends, were Catholic. 100% of them. Now in those days, the church's view, ecumenical view, was a little more narrow than it is now. And so what all my friends told me by the age of 6 was that I was going to hell. And I remember having the thought, darn, all the rotten luck. Now at that time, my family's religious tradition, my family had a very strong religious tradition. About a block and a half from where we lived in Covington was Main Street Methodist Church. And every Easter, whether we needed to or not, we walked to Main Street Methodist for their Easter service. That was my religious upbringing. So how did I get from there to here? Well, at the ripe old age of 23, I got into the motorcycle business. It's relevant. And even now, I like to think of myself as the most enlightened motorcycle dealer in Florence, Kentucky. Of course, well, thank you. You can hold the applause. The reason I'm very confident about that, I'm the only motorcycle dealer. So I'm pretty confident about that. And everything was going well. You know, the business was doing well. We even built a new addition, and I had a wonderful wife, Nancy, and we built a house in Burlington, Kentucky. I had all the symbols of happiness. And yet there was only one little problem. One little problem. I didn't have the experience of being fulfilled, of really being happy. There was core that said, there must be more to life than this. There must be. And I'm pretty confident that some of you have had that same experience, thinking, there's got to be more to life than this. Now, when I shared this experience, I opened my heart, I shared this experience with my friends. And they said, George, we think we know what the problem is. I said, great, what is it? They said, there's something wrong with you. And I thought about that. And they said, you know, if I was living your life, if I did what you did, if I had what you had, if I had a family you had, I'd be happy. So there must be something wrong with you. And I thought about that. And I said, you know what? I think you're right. There is something wrong with me. And so on my friend's recommendation, my friend Mary, rest her soul, she said, I've got this book you might want to read. And the name of the book was called Actualizations. You Don't Have to Rehearse to Be Yourself, by Stuart Emmer. It's the first personal growth book I ever read. I read that book and went, wow, this is really good stuff. And so Mary recommended that I go do this workshop put on by Stuart Emmer. It was in Denver, Colorado. And I got on that plane nervously. I wouldn't have got on the plane except they already had my $250 deposit. And I wasn't going to lose that. So I got on the plane, I went to Denver. And to make a long story short, that workshop turned my world upside down. And when I came back, I was in an altered state, would be one way to say it. And when I would try to talk with people to explain what had happened to me, I was pretty much at a loss. And I'd end up with a lot of profanity that embarrassed everybody I was talking to. And so Mary would go along with me to meet people and act as my interpreter. I think what he's trying to say is, they go, oh yeah. I couldn't say it. And so that led me on a path to doing workshops. I did over 30 personal growth workshops that kind of turned my head inside out in so many ways. And then along the way, Mary said another suggestion for me. She said, hey, I hear there's this church over in Cincinnati. And I said, I'm not interested in the church. And she said, well, I hear this church is a little different. And I said, well, with all the things that I've been through, I can set you an hour of anything. I'll go with you. Now, the next Sunday, we ventured to that new church. That church was called the New Thought Unity Center. That was over 30 years ago. And as you can see, I never left. And then Nancy came the next week, and we've been here ever since. Now, in those days, we would get here about 5 minutes till the service started, have a seat somewhere in the back. As soon as the service was over, we were out the door. That went on for a long time. And then, there was something inside me that said, get more involved. And I thought, well, what is that? Get more involved. What can I do? And then there was an announcement that we were going to paint Friendship Hall. Hey, I can paint. I know which end of the handle will hold. And so I helped paint Friendship Hall. That was my first volunteer assignment that I gave myself. Now, inside these walls, if you want to get involved, just say the word. Sam Ellison, I don't know where Sam is over here. Sam Ellison, our involvement manager, will accommodate you immediately. You know, I never belonged to a church in my life, and then 6 years later, I had that little nudge again that said, join the church. I don't know, join the church. That sounds, whoa, I've never belonged to a church. And so I took the orientation class. And after the orientation class, I still didn't join the church. No, too scared. Not going to do it. And then at the next orientation class, I took the step and I became a member, and then Nancy followed me soon after. One of the things I noticed after joining is that I was never asked to join. You ever notice that here? You know, we make an invitation to join. If you'd like to join us, here's the class. Doris has one coming up real soon. But nobody's going to say, George, you should join. This is what you should do. It's just not part of what we do. And why is that? Because we believe that there's a guidance within you that knows what's best for you. And you'll join if it's best for you. The truth is, you don't really have to join ever. Unless you want to be a prayer chaplain or serve on the board of trustees, vote at a congregational meeting, you can just hang out with this church for the rest of your life and participate in everything. Most of us don't even know who the members are and who the members aren't. We don't care. Now, along the way, the church was offering a few classes, and here came that nudge again. So I thought, well, maybe I'll get involved. I'll take a few classes. I took the classes. I loved the classes. So I kept taking more classes. And then I decided I'm going to go to Unity Village and take classes there. And so I did that. I did that for a couple of years. And then one day as I was walking through the administrative office, the gal who kind of kept tabs on us students said, George, I need to see you for a minute. I said, okay. So I sat down at her desk and she says, you know what? Unless you take this class that you're missing right here, you're not going to be able to become a licensed teacher this fall. And I said, I'm going to become a licensed teacher? She said, yeah. Something done. So, I became a licensed teacher. So the point that I'm working on, and want to leave to you, is that the unity principles that have supported me through these many years, I want to share just briefly those with you as we close today. And so, the first principle says that God is good, and God's goodness is everywhere present. Now, what I had to unlearn, and maybe some of you would need to unlearn this too, is that some of us grew up in churches where they said that, you know, we weren't so good. That God, if we didn't shape up, God was going to punish us. And so we had kind of an angry, vengeful kind of God, that as long as we kind of were on the straight and narrow, God was good. But if we got off track at all, it wasn't a good thing. But what I learned here was that God is good. And not only is God good, but the goodness of God is in me. It's in each of us. Each of us have been created in the image and likeness of goodness. That is our true birthright. Unity's second principle said, human beings have a spark of divinity within them. We call it the Christ Spirit. And it's their very essences of God, and therefore they are also inherently good. All of us created in the image and likeness, we are inherently good. And it isn't just for kids from Bakewell Street. It is for kids of all ages, everywhere. All of us contain that goodness within. Humankind's essence is of God, and therefore we are inherently good. Not only is that spark of God in each one of us, but it opens up a lot of possibilities. A lot of possibilities. God is creative expression, and we are created in the image and likeness of that creative expression. And that means when we become aware of the creative power of God in us, that we can change our lives for good. Change our lives and create our lives more the way we would like them to be, versus being the effect of light. We have a spiritual law that addresses that. It's called the law of mind action. It's my favorite spiritual law. It says this: thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. Thoughts don't like the results that we're having in our lives, we can do something about it. And what we can do is we begin to change the way we think about it. And it is our thoughts that's going to change our lives. Unity's third principle says this: human beings create their experience by the activity of their thinking. Everything in the manifest realm has its beginning in thought. And when I say everything, that's a lot, isn't it? Everything. In Burlington, we'd say, that's put near everything. That's a lot. Well, when we think about it, we really, if we look out in this world, even the chair, the pew you're sitting in, you cannot see anything that hasn't begun as a thought in someone's mind. Everything we see has been a thought in someone's mind. That means within us, every one of us, we have the power to create. We just need to wake up and creatively use it to create the good that we want. Along this journey, and I know a little long journey, but it's been a long journey. I decided I wanted to go to ministerial school because there was something in me, that nudge again, that says, got to be more to life than this. And so I applied. And I was accepted into ministerial school. But there was something in me that said, I just don't know if I want to leave home for 2 years. And so I asked the president, Bob Barth, at the time, could I put my application on hold? He said, okay, but only for 1 year. At the end of that, as that end of that first year was approaching, I was in a quandary about what was I going to do? What was I going to do? And I thought, I don't know what to do. I just don't feel like leaving home. And then guess what happened? The announcement came that my granddaughter Gracie was on her way. And when that happened, I said, I'm not leaving home. I'm staying here. It looked like the dream of becoming a minister was over. But God is so good. Turns out that Reverend Pat Whitton at the time was serving on the field licensing committee. And he said, George, things are shifting in that field licensing situation, and you might be able to get in if you apply. So I applied. I was accepted, and here I am. That's okay. 2 quick principles, and I'm going to close. Principle 4 says, prayer is creative thinking that heightens our connection with God's mind, and therefore, and brings forth wisdom, healing, prosperity, and everything good. Prayer and thought are sometimes looked at as synonymous.